Hello there, I'm Eltranos from Community Flavor Pack, and today I'm with Eltral from Community Flavor Pack team as well. We are going to do a 3D masterclass focused on the making of closest patterns. Eltral, you might want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Atro. I work on mostly patterns and 2D art for Community Flavor Pack. So far, you might have seen some of my work in some of the Middle Eastern uh, helmets. I've made some stamps for El Tyrannus to use to help improve his workflow and get things done faster. And in the latest African update, you would have seen some of the patterns that we use making as using a similar process to what we're going to show you today.
Yeah, exactly, and actually it's interesting because the patterns you don't even, necessarily see them at first, but they really help giving life to the game, and that's why we decided to focus our masterclass on this subject. Uh, it's hard to see or you don't notice it, but still it gives a lot of variety. Yeah? And as you can see here, we have the models are very similar. They could be the very same, and still they look different because of the patterns. So that's a system that anyone with basic knowledge on 2D art can access. Correct me if I'm wrong, Altral, but at least can do some first basic patterns and improve the variety in game.
Yeah, I think I mean a lot of people have some basic skill with Photoshop or Illustrator and the Adobe suite in general, and especially the basic patterns. There's a few tools you can use to very quickly put some together and get them in game. So hopefully it'll be interesting for anyone who's got a little bit of experience in that. And if not, there are always tutorials online. There's so many for how to use Photoshop and Illustrator. So yeah, definitely take a look at that if you're curious.
Yeah, and so today we are going to talk about five main points, which are how to create a basic pattern. We won't focus especially on the 2D skills. We'll as well will tell you always what is a workflow in general, but we are not going to be very focused on the 2D skills and the 2D softwares because there are tons of dedicated tutorials about vectorization or and so on YouTube and elsewhere with people who are much more competent than us. We are going really to focus on the in-game and the 3D engine mechanism. So there is no more secret about this for you, and you can just unleash your 2D powers. So the color palette and the RGBA relationships, it's a bit overwhelming at first. It's not that complicated. Then it gives a lot of flexibility to the system. An introduction to the PBR rendering, how the mod structure is done, because we are releasing with this Modcon panel a mod sample that you can reverse engineer and work over. And then for 3D artists, a little part more focused for you how to set up your models. So actually, that's your job in Community Flavor Pack. What do you do when you're creating a first pattern?
So I always start in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. It's just perfect for this kind of work, really. It gives you a lot of tools to do it mathematically, and there are a lot of well, everything you make in Illustrator can be scaled up or down as much as you want without it becoming blurry. So I use Illustrator, but you could use Photoshop, or I mean, you could probably even use MS Paint if you wanted to. I don't recommend it, but it would work. What I what I tried to do is with simple patterns like these, where you can see there's like stripes or squares in a repeated pattern, you can do this quite easily with Illustrator's inbuilt pattern making system. So you could just make the basic, like for the dot pattern you see outlined in purple. All I did there was make one dot, and then I used Illustrator's inbuilt pattern system to turn that into a pattern. And you need to make sure that your pattern is 512 by 512 pixels, because that's what the game uses. But obviously, because it's in Illustrator, as long as it's a square resolution, you can upsize or downsize as much as you want to make it fit in the game. And so here I've showed you 4 different types of patterns that I just threw together really quickly. All of these you can make in about 5 minutes or less, and these can be assigned to different parts of the clothing. So I've showed the stripe pattern on the top, and you can see the stars on the belt and everything like that.
Yeah.
I guess I'll switch over to Photoshop and just show you something important.
Yeah, let me swap.
Yeah, you might have to do that, Terence.
I'm switching you right now, giving you the controls. Go on.
Okay, here we go. So if we go over to this checked file here, it's a bit laggy. So we can see here we've got a file, and what's important is that the left side and the right side need to match up, so that you can't, when it's duplicated next to each other, you can't tell that it's separate squares, because what the game's going to do is it's going to repeat this one square over and over again in different directions, and that's going to cover the whole of the clothing. So we need to make sure that the left side matches up with the right side, and the bottom matches up with the top.
Yeah.
And that makes sure we don't have any weird lines or anything.
That's what we call in 3D. It's called a seamless texture, so it's a tile basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's used. Actually, if you're a 3D artist or used to the 3D workflows, it's very similar to the workflows we use for buildings. Like if you have a very tall brick building, you don't want to have everything in a very small portion of your UV, of your texture, but instead you want to have something that is tiling. This way you have your brick tile of 1K by 1K, and it repeats over and over, and this way you don't lose your resolution. So it's basically a workflow that was taken from the architectural 3D workflows and bring into characters for the more technical aspect. So yeah, you want it to be seamless.
Yeah, and Tyrannos, maybe you can demonstrate quickly how this tile patterns. So the controls are a bit laggy for me, but maybe you can show everyone how that works.
Sure. Yeah, so let's maybe imagine that just it's because this one is going to tile obviously quite easily because it's all square, but you see that if I'm putting them next to each other, they tile. If there was an offset, I would have something like this, and in game you would have a very bad looking result if it wasn't matching. So as long as it matches, it can repeat over and over, and then just the zoom level of your model is going to influence the size of the squares in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's, yeah, I think that's a good introduction to what's a pattern here is. So we work here in black and white in the first place. That's it. That's all. Do you work black and white at first with various layers, of course, if you have to have more details?
Yeah, I mean it's up to you how you want to do it.
Yeah.
I Depending on the pattern, I might just start immediately working in the pure red, green, and blue colors, and we'll get on to later
Yeah, that's it.
why
Yeah,
those are
yeah.
important.
But if you had to make just a squared pattern, like the one in red here, you would just do it black and white, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. So let's maybe move on then. I think we covered it pretty well.
yeah,
Here we're going to talk about the color palette. It's subtitled "The Power of RGBA Layers." And directly you see you switch to a more complex layers that you did at first, more complex pattern, sorry, with RGBA stands for red, green, blue, alpha, uh, which are entries that the engine are going to read separately. So each layer is going to give an information to the engine to be interpreted into something in game. So here you have a full white background and then several shapes that combine into a final layer, right?
so you've got the red layer here, which is the background, and then the green layer goes on top of the red, the blue goes on top of the green, and then the alpha, which is shown as purple here, goes on top of everything else.
Right.
So yeah, that's how you can stack up your different layers to make sure that the right things sit on top of the right parts of the pattern.
Right. And
And
then
then yeah, go ahead.
the right of part of the screen, you give per layer a color information that is going to be recombined into a colored pattern, right?
Yeah, so here we've got it will interpret, the game engine will interpret the red layer, and it will say, okay, I want to match the red layer to white, the green layer to this kind of slightly different green color, the blue layer to a slightly lighter blue, and the alpha layer to this yellow color. And then it will combine all of that together, and we'll get the final image here where we've got like a nicely colored
Yeah.
pattern.
So the interest once the color is recombined is that you can then shuffle the colors and assign different colors per parts, pretty much. So that's a more complex version here. So here you kept your initial patterns that we saw in the first slide. And from the RGBA information, which is on the first line on the top, you're getting each time a specific color to the pattern, and then you have many colors acting at the same time to combine here a fixed version of your pattern.
Yeah, so what we're doing here, basically, if we've got the RGBA channels on the model itself. So here we've got red for the main part of the tunic, we've got blue for the collar, we've got green for the belt, and then we've got alpha for the arms. And then we say, okay, I want to assign this checked pattern to the main part of the tunic, and then we say we also want to assign this color palette to that tunic, and then the game will create the variation and apply that to the tunic. So we've got the 4 different RGBA palettes there for each of the patterns, and that's why they're different colors.
Yeah, for the 3D part, we'll come back to it at the end to see how we set up the model to do this. If you are not familiar with 3D, of course, this is something you don't have to make. It's already made for every single model working with patterns in game, so you can edit them, and you don't have to bother about it. It's more like how to understand the complete structure of the system. If you're just going to make patterns, you want to focus on the lower part of the diagram. So now, how is it going to turn? We have seen the theory very broadly, and we are going to keep on going into the details and understand how everything is structured. So it's going to become a little bit more complex, not that much. Here we go, there. So that's a pattern you will find in the sample mode and that you can edit. On this screen you will see also the file names, sorry. So the actual mask of the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4 with red, green, blue and alpha layers, and then the color palette sample 01, which is giving the color information to the pattern. So I've done 4 times. How is the color palette structured? It's 16 pixels. It's 1 pixel per square. It's 1 line in this case, and it's 16 pixel wide. Each 4 pixel is assigned to 1 layer, as the arrow are pointing. So if we focus on the variations error value, it's going to give the input to this sample 01 mask. Why? Because you are going to see in sample.txt at the very bottom that my variation, which is named sample pattern 01, has RGBA values calling for textures. And we will get to it right after in the mod structure, but it's calling for my pattern definition, and the color palette is just going to be the link between the pattern information and the color. I don't know if I'm very clear at all. But
yeah, so just to make it clear how the color palette's working here, we've got 16 different pixels in the palette, and each part of the tunic uses 4 of those pixels. So the first 4 pixels are connected to the R value of the
variation,
the clothes, of the variations mask. So actually, if we go back to here, so the first 4 pixels here will represent the red part of the tunic, so the main bit, and then the next 2 will represent the belt, and so on like that. So that's you'll see when you open up the color palette file and play around with it, you'll see that each of these 4 pixels in a row represent the different parts of the clothing.
Yeah, and if you follow my mouse, this part here is going to focus on the main part of the clothes. This one, G value, is this line, Western linen trim. I think it's actually linen trim. It might be those, or oh no, those of the under tunic. The blue value is Western silk trim, so that's everything on the main tunic. So the collar, sleeves, and the Western wool belt is just the belt here. And each time, as I have the same color, it gives this impression of everything has the same color palette. Of course, that's the goal, but you can see that the patterns are made very complex here compared to my sample, thanks to the fact they are ordered as in different layers, catching a different color each. I think.
Yeah, and in practice, you'll see that in the vanilla color palettes, a lot of the colors are the same. So that's something you have to be aware of, is that you might have a nice pattern like this with lots of different colors, and then when you assign it to the vanilla color palette, you might see that just all of the colors are the same, and you can't actually make out your pattern. So that's why you need to be able to add your own color palettes and edit the colors in there.
Yeah. Just before going to the next slide, just be aware that the pattern DDS files are in BC3 or DXT5, and the color palette is in 8.8.8, which is a weird format, but it's specific to it. So when you save your files, you have to pick the right format for them. And so if we go there to this sample, it's the color palette from, I think, the Western High Nobility, which that I edited a little bit to make the various parts of my sample pattern visible. So it was initially the same yellow here, the same brown here, and the same gray. I just made this column darker so they are visible in the patterns. But you see that once you have your color palette structured, the game is going to shuffle and pick one randomly and then assign it to your tunic. So here we have the same model, same patterns is running, just the color palette is picking a different line. We might want to go check that in game.
Yeah.
Actually, with the sample mod, which is running here. So if we grab our character, bye guys. You will find in the sample mod 4 entries. Here we have the default one you just saw. And here you have the version with the activated color palette. So it's going to be shuffled. This one is brown and green, but if we pick another character, why are you naked? Scary guy. But this one would be gray. So I gave a little info in the string. This one is the helper plus one line color, and this one is the helper plus multiple line color. So when you pick the mod and want to edit it to understand how it works, so it's structured, you can play around and edit directly. So another color again. There are several lines, so you're going to have a lot of options here. And this one is not yet in because we are pre-recording, but this one will feature a finished sample pattern in the end when it will be published. Yeah, I guess that's it for now.
Yeah.
Let's go on.
Yeah, the great thing is about playing around with it like this is the patterns will update in real time as you change your color palette, and as you play with the files, you don't need to reload your game. You don't even need to reload the textures. You just change the file and it will change in game. So I really encourage anyone to play around with that and get a feel for it.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that is actually not yet the next slide, but we'll get to it in a moment when we will talk about the PBR rendering. There we are going to keep going and talk about the mod structure and the relation between the different files, because in CK modding you have plenty of text files, plenty of information that are thrown to your eyes, and so the goal here is to make a sample mod with isolated files and explain to you which one is doing what, and there's no secrets. You don't need anything more to start working than the sample mod and the files are inside and knowing what each of them is doing. So it's quite overwhelming. In red is the asset file. It's where all the information about the model is located. So that's the path. You will find it there. And then we have two kind of, I ordered it as two branches. The first branch, you won't change it. You don't have to change it to start working. It's going to call for an entity which is defined in this file. and then the entity is listed in this file in a group, and then this group is listed in this file, so it's displayed in the barbershop. Basically, if you want just patterns, you don't change that. But they are here, so I'm explaining to you why. The important part for our subject is the part below. You are going to have in the asset a call for the variation, which is located in sample.txt that you already saw a little bit earlier in a few slides above. And this one defines the patterns, the layout, the variations, and calls for the color palette files. And then it's going to call for the model mask texture. You have seen it as well. It's where Atwal has done red, green, blue, and purple on a short drawing. And it calls for this file, which is going to define what part of the model is going to receive what texture from the variation pattern. So you already explained it, Atwal. Just to repeat, red here is the red here, which is going to call for this sample, this pattern, basically. And then it's repeated 4 times. So yeah, that's it. How is it called? Maybe let's quickly check quickly check the asset file. If we go there, the pattern mask for the model is called here, and the variation is called there. So you have 4 models in the sample. You have sample pattern 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are defined so in sample.txt. They work all 4 with the same model, so you have 4 times the same mask. And something that you need to have in your model is the portrait attachment pattern shader, which is going to actually make the engine read for these values and activate the system. And that's it. It's quite simple, yeah, in fact. If you know what to look at, of course. Maybe let's move on. Or do you have anything to add there, Atwal, maybe on the files? Maybe.
I mean, you know more about it than I do. I would just say, I mean, using the sample mod, it might be a bit overwhelming when you first open it, but I mean, there's really only a couple of files you need to care about. And once you get an idea for what each one does and what each part corresponds to, it should be quite simple to edit that.
Yeah, the fun story is that I actually did it for Atwal at first because it was the easiest way to convey the structure, how it works. And so Atwal used a much less user-friendly version of the sample mod to actually learn the system. So hopefully the video and the more better structured sample mod will allow you to do the same. Shall we move on to the PBR part?
Yeah, I think so.
So that's a quite big part of the cake, yeah, and we are just going to cover it quite roughly, I guess. Just as an intro, what's PBR? For those who are not familiar, it's physically based rendering. In the history of 3D, you had people, in fact, took pictures, literally, of the assets they wanted to reproduce, and they stamped it on low poly models. And so that was like in Doom, the first Doom, it's just an image, and there's no sensation of roughness or metalness or reflection or gloss or opacity or even bump maps. There's nothing. It's just flat pixels and all the same look. And for the last 15 years, engineers developed the normal maps, which is the bump map. Basically, it gives a sensation of relief. Is it relief? Yeah. And then they developed the specularity, which was a beginning of material shining, and you could basically do or wet or metal. And now we have the PBR, which is going to be a much more complex simulation of lighting, thanks to the roughness, which is top here, roughness, from completely rough to glossy, like a mirror, and the reflectivity or the metalness, which is pitch black or reflect a lot of light. And thanks to this, as you can see here, with a good quality 8 map below, you end up being able to simulate any kind of material. And that is a system that is almost a standard now in game industry. Not all games are able to display to work under PBR, or it's an artistical choice not to do it. But yeah, to come back to CK3 supports PBR, and the patterns are actually working in PBR, which gives, if I switch back to the game very fast and go back to my own character, there that's where you want to I have to add, yeah, there, okay. Forgot again to switch the scene, but if we zoom in a bit, you can see all the reflection here of the embroidery, and as well as the different normal. It's the normal, but I don't know what the word is in regular English. Like a bump map, or a height map, or whatever. That's the physical based rendering, and it makes the materials look different and very realistic. And to do this, we're doing something elsewhere, and it's going to transition now. So let's move on now to Substance Designer. That's where you might want to introduce ourselves to the software and what you're doing in there.
Yeah, so this is Substance Designer, and I mean, as far as I know, this is a tool that's used a lot in the gaming industry, and I'm pretty sure it's also what they use to create the vanilla patterns in Crusader Kings. But what this lets us do is it lets us create our own normal maps, roughness maps, metallic, and also ambient occlusion. So if we go over to the normal map at the top there, we can see I've loaded in an image, and that's got this nice little kind of padded doublet effect on it. And what I've done here, I grabbed this image off of a copyright-free image, and I've just edited in Photoshop. I've put in these little lines to separate it, and then what I've done is I've plugged this into the normals. If we go up, then I've converted that into a normal map, and then you can adjust things like the intensity, and then that gives us a bit of a kind of 3D sticking out effect, and you can see the wrinkles in the cloth and stuff like that, and that makes quite a nice effect. And then what I've also done, you can notice the little studs there, and that's a combination of both roughness and metallic. So I've basically put the roughness and the metallic on those studs close to the maximum, and that makes them shiny and metallic, and so they look like little air studs. And there's a motorbike in the background.
Yeah, so it works. The roughness and metallic work a bit. They are values. So if it's white, it means 1, and if it's black, it means 0. So you basically have a 0 roughness value on the studs, and you have a pure white, so 1 value of metallic still on the studs, which gives this contrast between the cloth is very rough and doesn't reflect
and
the
that
light.
can be and that can be white or black, but it can also be like any level of gray in between that.
Okay,
So you can play around with different levels of shininess and
like
and
there.
stuff like that. And
basically here you have no pure roughness inside the in between the cushions, and then you have a bit more reflect shininess on the upper part, so it gives more depth here. So this one is in African pack. It's in community flavor pack if you want to check it out. And the ambient occlusion.
So the ambient occlusion it kind of adds basically a shading effect to the pattern. Well, at least you might know a bit more about that than me, but you can see it's a bit darker in the cracks.
It's actually occlusion. It's where like drop shadows, pretty much, but not as drop shadows. It's to reinforce the natural shades of the light of the direct light. I was quite surprised to see it. I actually learned it right before we started the record, but I was quite surprised to see that it is in the pattern system, and it's very good because usually the ambient occlusion is baked from a high poly model, but when you're doing a piece of cloth, like let's take a cloak, okay? A cloak is going to be quite stiff because it has a lot of weight. And if you want to add a specific material to that cloak, like let's say a fur or such padded stuff, well, it's going to apply on something that is initially flat and has no ambient occlusion at all. So it's interesting to have this input added directly to the pattern, of course. It gives, again, much more quality to the final rendering.
Yeah, and we can really, we can make some pretty cool effects with this. I think the vanilla game has done some cool stuff with wool and stuff like that, but I think there's definitely potential to do more complex things.
Yeah,
and a bit like this, I think, is a bit more complex than what we see in vanilla.
Yeah, of course, we are still learning, of course, and we have plenty of things to discover about the softwares. But still, is it possible to do this? And if, like, I'm beginning and I don't have Substance Designer, which has a price, is it possible to do this in Photoshop if I already have Photoshop? Or
yeah, so all of this can be, apart from the normal maps. The normals are a bit more complicated to do, but in Photoshop we can play with the roughness, the metallic, and I guess we can also do the ambient occlusion.
Yeah, basically you can do even the normal maps. You have a normal Nvidia does a plugin for Photoshop that deals with the normal maps, but it's just not going to be as good as what Substance is going to do, because you don't have all the modifiers that you can apply to it. It's going to be straight. There's an input, bam, here's your normal map for this input, and you don't have much tweaking. But you still can generate normals, ambient occlusion as well. Yeah, just good knowledge of Photoshop is required, of course. But that's basically how these three artists did their texturing work before Substance Painter became the industry standard, pretty much. But most of it, gone.
I will say quickly, it's a paid software and it's quite expensive, so I wouldn't recommend people buy it unless you're really into this stuff. But if you're a student, you can put in your student email and you can get all of the Substance suite for free. So if you are a student, yeah, it might be worth giving it a download and try it out. There's loads of tutorials online.
Yeah, you also have the 30 days trial, of course, for a regular person. So really, if you want to get into 3D or something looking like 3D or even things like this, it's a good. It's worth a try. The softwares are really the industry standard now, and more, of course, but not like 100%, but they have a very very large market now, and for good reason. Even if Adobe bought it, but that's another topic. So maybe let's switch back to our presentation. So how is it structured? So that's from Substance Painter, where you can also make the patterns if you have it. As Photoshop, it's not made for it, unlike Substance Designer, but you can manage to have something out of Substance Painter. So you can see that the normal is actually the red layer and green layer of the normal OpenGL. It's maybe a bit complicated, so don't think too much. It's just like that. It's a rule. When you have your normal map, the export must be red layer, green layer. When you are doing your properties, which is going to record for ambient occlusion, the roughness and the metallic, you have the ambient occlusion in the red layer. Here it's black, the green is black, the blue layer is the metallic, and the alpha is the roughness. And this, you don't care, it was for my own, because I don't use Substance Designer, so I was trying stuff, but just ignore this. And let's switch to Photoshop, just to put that into practice directly before you give up there. So let's close this. We're back to our sample here. That's the sample you saw in game. Okay, with 1, 2, 3, 4, with its layers that you saw in the presentation. And for this time, I did basically a neutral properties file and a neutral normal. So it has 0 input. It's pure flat and pure basic. I mean, there's no information actually. Yeah. So what can we see there? Let's go the natural maybe. Should we just draw a line?
Yeah, if we can basically, what we can do is we can edit these layers in Photoshop. So as Theranos said earlier when we were looking at Substance Designer, the blue layer here is metallic. So this will make it more shiny and metal.
Let's do that.
So then if we just draw whatever pattern here, that will make it more metallic, and then we can also change the alpha layer, which is the shiny.
The roughness. So if
I guess let's yeah.
If I let me just have the share screen there because the exporter wasn't showing up. If I save this now and get in game and show my, you can see here it's there, the Z here. It's very subtle, but that's here. And
yeah, and this will become more obvious. I mean, the more shininess you have, the more obvious, or the less roughness you have, the more obvious the metallic effect will be. So we'll see that in a minute.
There, I'm picking the input from the blue channel and putting it here and save again. So you see BC3 format for those. There we go. So here it's actually no reflection at all. I mean, there's the metalness, but there's no roughness. So if we just do this and revert, like that. There we go. So here we have full-on metalness, full-on roughness. So it's acting like a mirror, basically. And so that's how you tweak your values. So a ambient occlusion, can add a bit of ambient occlusion, I guess. Let's put some white. It's always black. The blue is the metalness and the alpha is the roughness. So all the PBR values are in there. There we go. Oh, it's actually quite nice.
Right enough. Yeah.
And pimped. So if you make this fit to your base layer, here it's not matching with the base pattern, of course, but I mean you could just pick the blue layer here and do this there do this, and there do this, and if I save this, there we go. So yeah, it's just some photoshopping, and it's not really that's out. And it gives a lot of realism in the end when it's done properly. Yeah, we are just showing you how it works, all the tweaking and research and development and so on. Unfortunately, we don't have all the keys, so we cannot give them all at once, and we are in the same situation as many here, which is essay and error. Yeah, and do you want to add something about the property at all, maybe, or I see?
Yeah, I mean, quickly before we move on, we should mention the exporter that comes up when you try and save.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're already if you've done any icon editing or anything like that, or UI, you would have probably already figured this out. But if you're new to modding, what we've got here is the Nvidia Texture Tools exporter, and that's not in Photoshop by default. So this is a plugin that you have to install
from Nvidia
if
website.
You just search, yeah, if you just search that on Google, Nvidia Texture Tools exporter, you'll be able to find that and install it, and then you'll get this menu. And the important thing is when you're exporting properties or masks, you need to use BC3, and you need to untick the pre-multiplied alpha blending. Otherwise, you won't get the right effect. And then for color palettes, we need to export in 8.8.8, I think it was.
Yeah, I told that earlier, it's 8.8.8.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the colors value is lost. And I'm not going to do it because I don't have a backup of this.
Which is a mistake we made when we were trying to.
But basically,
do the Africa update.
Yeah, if I do this and save it in 8.8.8, there we go. And if I just check this one, it's flipped all the color as well here. So another thing that you can edit live, and it's back. So it's very easy to tweak. If I'm not happy with one color, I can quite easily change. What am I doing? Oh yeah, I'm in paint mode. I think that's actually this one, but if I'm grabbing this and putting it, it's I don't know if it's this one. Let's try. But if you want to edit just one color, you can do this and save it. Hey, it wasn't it. It must be this one then. But yeah, it makes it quite easy to tweak actually. That's quite convenient there.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you just have to pick the right line. But yeah, very easy to tweak the colors as well, the saturation and so on. Yeah, and for the normal map, unfortunately, we don't have prepared anything, but it's more complex. But you could, and I don't have the plugin installed anymore because I updated my Photoshop. But you would basically have inputs, different inputs, I think that this, if I save this, is going to add some value like this. So you can work the normal map. I'm really not familiar with it, so I do this in specific software. So, but you can do it in Substance Designer. You can do it in Substance Painter. In Photoshop, I don't know how to work the normal as well. So I don't know if you do at all. But
I don't know how to do it in Photoshop, but what you can do if you just want to get some nice looking textures going, there's a lot of textures in the vanilla game. So some of those you can just apply on top of your texture. There's some quite plain ones that just have like a fabric texture on top of them. So
yeah, true.
what you can do is you can search through the vanilla files and find one that suits you, and then you can apply that to whichever pattern you want.
Yeah, if we go there and you can pick, you look for plane, and you are going to come over all the plane ones they did, so burlap, blah blah blah, and you can grab and use this for your own. Something to know is that a normal map is actually looking like this. It's blue, but if you pick a normal map somewhere on the internet, it's going to be blue. That's perfectly normal. It's because this blue channel in the engine is useless, so it's black. And here you have green and green. They are twice the same. And here it's, what did I say? Red, I think. Green, red, and red.
I think so.
Yeah. So that's specific to the engine. It's a rule, it's like that. And it's OpenGL. So it means a DirectX is going to be like this. OpenGL is going to be like this. It's not the same light direction pretty much. But yeah, those some things you will come out tricking it. If you use the exporter settings I sent you, it will work all fine. And in Substance Designer, it's easy to tweak as well. But yeah, you will come over it as you work. What's next for us then? Should we switch back to the presentation? There we go.
So.
And we're going to go on our last part. As well, do you have anything that comes to mind regarding patterns for now? We did not. I think we did not browse the sample.txt file. And I said, now that I think about it, there we go. I was in Blender. We did not browse this.
Yeah, we saw this a bit in one of the slides. We saw part of it, but
we saw this.
Go over it in more detail. I mean, especially something we haven't mentioned is just above what you've got highlighted here. We've got the pattern layout, and here you can specify the scale of your pattern. So if you want your pattern to be bigger or smaller, you can adjust that number there where it says min and max, and then that will scale up and down your pattern.
Save it there. So it's actually simple. It's you have to rewind to the slide with the files relationship. So if you get in the asset file, it calls for sample pattern 01. And sample pattern 01 is this variation. And the files after that call for sample pattern 02, we have already seen this, and it's there. Right, 3, 4. So let's focus on the one. Number 1 is going to call for sample helper 01, which is defined here. And it opens my sample 01 mask normal properties. This is the files you have seen here in Photoshop already. So nothing new here. The thing that is new is the pattern layout. It's the second value in the red channel, which is sample helper layout, and that's where you're going to define the scale value. And if I save it, you're going to notice it changes live. So you can adjust per per layout. Okay, you can create new layouts and change and etc. So that's a convenient way to scale. The CK3, it's melting with French. The CK3 tries to have patterns that have the same, roughly the same scale, and then they adjust it in the layout and in the models. But you want to have a kind of consistency, because otherwise you are going to have extreme values somewhere for one file and extreme scale in the texture, which is going to lead you to a scale in the models that will not fit to all your patterns. Basically, they have scaled their models, then all their patterns are the same scale, and then they have a few options for pattern layout, and that's it. If you look here, they used small trim layout for both. They don't have 100 pattern layouts. They only have maybe 6 or 7. I just put it here so you know that it exists and you can make new one and auto tweak them. But in game, they have like something like brocard stuff. They don't have that many. It's important not to go in every direction, otherwise you are going to lose your consistency and it's going to be a mess. Yeah. And so what is specific here is we can have several values of patterns in the same variation, and we can have a specific weight. So if I put 10 here, this one will spawn 10 times versus 1 and 1. So basically it's this one spawns 100%, 50%, 100%. What I was saying, 25, 25, 50. Yeah, it's a weight. And the last part calls for the color palette. But I guess you could have two. I'm not sure about it. I never tried. Let's see. Maybe I'm going to crash my game.
Yeah, second try.
Let's see that. Let's put 100. Ah, no. Okay. What? Oh, because I'm not editing the right one. Hold on. Let's try. Sample 1. Yeah. Oh, it works. Nice. And if I put... Yeah, so you can have several color palette as well. There we go. And with the weight as well. So, yeah. You can... Yeah, let's revert. Okay. So, yeah, that's the sample. That's just where the patterns are declared in terms of text and what files is it going to grab and how is it going to be combined. I think that's it. Do you see anything else as well?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So maybe last but not least, for those who are more into the 3D the 3D models. I'm going to introduce you on the model setup. Okay. So you saw that in the asset file, I'm calling for a mask. This is not the same mask as the pattern. It's a mask that is dedicated to the model. And that's what you had in the very first slide with the red, green, blue, and pink colored shirt from Atral. But this time it's turned into 3D. You can see that it's red, green, blue, alpha. And I applied them on the model, and you can see how it matches with the actual 3D representation in game. Little information: the red layer is always pure white. The reason, and in the patterns as well, the reason for this is to avoid to have any empty pixel that is going to turn white and look creepy and out of place. So we have a full white base. And then the other layers are going to overlay on top of each other. And that's something you said, Atral, but I just wanted to repeat that the base is white. Yeah. And so and you can see that this part is white and this part is also white, but this one is going to be displayed over this color. And it's the same for the belt. Here it's white, but the end result is going to be this because it's the alpha, it's the last one to be displayed, so it's always on top. So that's this is done on the UV1, so we will switch to Blender in one moment when I will show you, but this is the UV1, so if you don't take the mask, that's where the normals are going to be applied, where the diffuse is going to be applied, and the model's properties, so the PBR values. Yeah, so black and white, still the RGBA setup, and that's what the sample is going to call. So red is this, green blah 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 blah, RGBA, apply this pattern, apply this pattern, apply this pattern, under that and that layout. So that's the UV1 of the model. So what I just showed you, and the UV2 is going to be the actual scaling of it. So let me swap to Blender here. So that's the model. Unfortunately, I did not save my file with all the textures applied, but that's whatever. So the map one is where the mask is going to be applied, but also all the color, blah blah blah, color, normals, properties. And the UV2 is the scale. So how does it turn out? Let's have this in screen sharing, open that. Okay, I have the game behind just to show you guys there. Okay. If I scale this like this and save the model, you see everything goes offset, and including the trims here. And that's why I come back to the standardization thing I told you, is that all the trims in the game have the same, I mean, they have two kinds, they have small trims and large trims, but they are all the same thickness. Otherwise, as soon as you put a new one, it's not going to match the models, because you can't afford, when you have in the end 50 possible variation, maybe you cannot afford to make 50 models. You have one model and everything has to fit what the model is going to offer. So when you're creating your model, you want to stick to that standard from Paradox, just for the sake of making your own model compatible with the vanilla patterns. See, if I zoom too far, then I lose the embroidery, etc., etc. Everything goes offset. But that's where you scale it. And you can also see that, let me swap back to the presentation. You can see here that I selected this trim on the bottom, which is this trim in UV1, and it turns into this trim in UV2. And the difference between the two UVs is that all the trims of the bottom part of the tunic are superposed here, and they are rectified, which means they are squared faces, not triangles, and they are rectified, so they match with the pattern file, which is rectified, of course, since it comes out from Photoshop or Substance or whatever. As you can see also, as well, the distribution of the mesh between the two is different. The thing is, your pattern is going to, of course, follow the topology of your UV. So based on how your UV is, your UV2 is, it's going to deform or scale differently the pattern. And the image below is just to illustrate what I was saying at the very beginning from the architectural 3D workflow. If you make a simple brick wall of bricks, based on the scale of your UV for the two same meshes, you have different scale, what we just saw, but that's the origin of the workflow. So it's quite easy to set up in terms of 3D. You just need your UV2, and you need to call for your shader in the asset file. You need to call for your mask, which is RGBA, and then go over all the setup we just covered. And in the end, you have this great system. And before we drop to the conclusion, maybe Atral, you have a few more words just on the technical aspect? Or
I mean, I guess we can just talk about where can they find this sample mod that we've been showing off throughout this presentation.
Yeah, of course. It's going to be on Steam Workshop. I don't have the direct link. I will try to put that in the description, or eventually share it in a live session right after this pre-recorded video. Anyhow, we will communicate on the link on all the Modcon medias, so you will be able to find it on Steam Workshop and Paradox Mods platform. Yep, of course.
And I mean, the other thing is just, I mean, this might take a bit of time to get a hang of. If anyone's got any questions, you can find me in the in the CFP Discord. So join there, send me a direct message, and if you're having any problems, I'll try and help you out.
Yeah, we are also on Paradox, of course, the CK3 Mod Co-op, and various other Discords. And yeah, maybe Atral was maybe your more on a less technical aspect and more personal aspect. How did you what was your experience with it? You're very capable in 2D. You're not familiar with the 3D. The patterns are a bit in between. How long did you need to get used to it? Was it painful? I mean,
so I came into this not really knowing much about Crusader Kings modding at all. Yeah, I know the 2D stuff, so that was fine. But in terms of getting the hang of it, once I knew the export settings and once I got this little sample mod from Alteranos, I mean, you can really get going with it pretty quickly. It took me just maybe 15 minutes to just get a hang of which layer does what and play around with it. But I mean, it's really something in a couple of hours you should be able to figure out. So I encourage people to have a go if they're interested in adding any new patterns to the game.
Yeah, it's really something that, again, as I said in the intro, it gives life to the game. It can be done quickly, but you also can spend 3 days on one pattern if you want to make something very complex. Of course, there's no limit, and the artistical opportunities are interesting. If you are more into putting a foot in the gaming industry, know that substance designer is really the good artists and substance designer are very have a very strong options to get into game design, because the software is so much powerful and it's really the future of procedural generation and so on. So it's really a good entry door to the 3D industry. So it's a good learning project, good things to start with, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And what should I say? Yeah, don't forget to enable the dev mode of the game. Create a shortcut. Dash. No, it's not a dash. just set dev mode. Look on the wiki, CK3 wiki, CK3 dev mode, and don't forget to enable it for the file patching so it updates live, which makes it very, very convenient to work with and quite funny. It's actually a very good entry to the current 3D workflows of painting in 3D and not in 2D anymore. It's really, you have your model and you're going to paint over it and almost like a sculptor or a painter, but in 3D. And oh, I had a conclusion slide. Perfect. That's just, yeah, maybe let's go from in each, let's go through each line. A model can call one variation via the portrait attachment pattern, so only one, but each variation can contain several patterns. Each pattern is composed of 4 texture sets or less. Just leave it black, okay? Each texture set can display 4 colors defined in the color palette. The system relies on RGB layers to allow a lot of variations without needing to duplicate model files indefinitely. Models use an RGB mask over UV1 to define where the texture set will apply. Model use a UV2 to adjust the scale over rectified UV islands, which is a very common workflow in architecture. It's really, I think we covered everything, so we don't have to re-record the part. I think we can call it this down. And yeah, if you have any question, we will see you right now for a live question time. And for those who are looking at it in later in time, I hope you enjoyed and you spent a good time and that the tutorial was helpful and exhaustive to you, and that you see more clearly where you want to go. Yeah, Atral, maybe.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks for participating, Atral. It was very helpful and very fun to do it with you. And yeah, have a good Modcon and see you in the medieval times. Bye bye.
Bye.